Thank you for joining us this evening as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing with this special program. I'm Stephanie Street, and I serve as Executive Director of the Clinton Foundation. Our program tonight, From Darkness to Light, is possible because of the incredible partnership we have had over the years and continue to have with the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum. So just so grateful that you all made the trip to come here. And obviously the Clinton Library and Museum is our partner. I want to give a special thank you to Governor Frank and Kathy Keating for joining us tonight. Please, thank you. Governor, thank you so much. Also want to give a warm welcome and a special thank you to Carrie Watkins and Dr. Susan Chambers from the Memorial and Museum. Thank you all. And the current mayor of Oklahoma City, David Holt, and the former mayor of Oklahoma City, Ron Norick. Thank you all. A really special guest who's here tonight is our former First Lady of Arkansas, Janet Huckabee. We're so pleased you're here. And obviously, it's always a pleasure for me as a former Clinton administration staffer to welcome other former Clinton administration distinguished officials. I was a staffer, they were very distinguished. We have the former Secretary of Transportation, who also was the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration, Secretary Rodney Slater here. And the former director of FEMA, Director James Lee Witt. Thank you. And by the way, President Clinton made that post a cabinet position. So just don't forget that. I don't know if it is anymore, but it was so important to President Clinton that James Lee was a member of his cabinet. And a really great friend, an old friend, but he's not old, is Don Bayer, who came in tonight. Don served in many roles or had really fancy titles. He was the former White House Communications and Strategy Director, Director of Speechwriting and Research, and was the Chief Speechwriter. Don, welcome home. Welcome back. And obviously, it always is a pleasure to introduce my partner here at this site, the director of the Clinton Library, Dr. Jay Barth, who will be moderating one of the panels this evening. We all remember certain days that should be typical, routine, and ordinary. But then the unimaginable thing happens, and suddenly it becomes, well, where were you on that day? These are moments that you'll always remember that are really sort of indelible in one's mind. That day happened to me in the White House on April 19th, 1995. That day of the Oklahoma City bombing. A day when we lost 168 people, including 19 children. And a day that caused profound sorrow and grief for thousands more. A day that left a scar on America. On that day, I was in my office at the White House and was hosting a meeting about President Clinton's schedule and what it would look like for the next 4 days. My team and I were always focusing on several things at the same time. What was happening that day? What was happening that week? What was happening 6 months from now? What is happening, next year? But this day, I remember very clearly, it was all about, there were a lot of things happening that week, so we were really focused on all of the events of that week. And it was about 10 a.m. Eastern time as our meeting was wrapping up. And the TV was on, it was always on in my office. And I remember glancing at it and reading, explosion in Oklahoma City. We were all glued to the TV for the next 10 or 15 minutes. It seemed like hours. I'll never know really what it felt like. Like I said, it felt like a second, but looking back now, it felt like an eternity. And none of us knew what to do or to think. We were all just sort of in shock. And Billy Webster, who was a colleague of Dawn and mine in the White House, was here last week because I was trying to remember exactly what was happening because I kept conflating sometimes the Waco tragedy with this tragedy, and I was trying to separate where I was in both instances. And he reminded us about that meeting that was in my office. And he told me, and now I remember it very clearly, that we sat there, like I said, just dumbfounded in silence, watching in horror for those 10 or 15 minutes. And our meeting was over. We had already planned the whole week. And I got up and took the schedule and just tore it in half and said, we're going to have to start over. And in many ways, we did have to start over. We not only needed to start over, but we needed to start over together. We needed to reach across the aisle. We needed to bridge the divide. We needed to unite because that is what Oklahoma City and America needed to process this loss and to heal and to try to prevent this from ever happening again. The Oklahoma City bombing was a pivotal moment in our nation's history, not because of the destruction and the loss, not just because of the destruction and the loss, but because it also became an incredible time of hope and unity. It is a lesson for the future. It reinforced that we were stronger together, that we could overcome one of the greatest tragedies imaginable together as one nation. And it is the people that allowed us to do this. The first responders, the fire, the police, the EMTs, who literally picked people up out of the rubble. Those serving Oklahoma, the mayor, the governor, and many, many other state and federal and local officials. And it was FEMA, our national disaster team, the FBI, and so many others. But most importantly, it was the people of Oklahoma City who were the strength and the light, even at the very darkest time. And it was also our President Bill Clinton, who chose to lead instead of divide, who made guiding the country through the process of healing and recovery the #1 priority. I saw firsthand how President Clinton chose to be a unifying, healing figure. It came naturally to him. And how he very subtly acknowledged that the rhetoric that created this bombing was not all that different from the rhetoric that was being used at the time by the media, mainstream political figures, and many others. A rhetoric that has sadly come back today. We must once again choose healing and unity and coming together over this division. We need to choose to come together as Americans and as human beings. This bombing can teach us some things, but the people of Oklahoma and Oklahoma City teach us the greatest lesson of all. We can only come out of darkness by choosing light and hope and healing, and we have to do so together. Thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming Carrie Watkins to the podium.
Thank you very much for having us, and honored to be here. I look back 30 years and that day of darkness, and I look at the years of light that have come from that horrible day. And it started with the leadership at the city level, the state level, the federal level. It was a fire chief humble enough to say, yes, bring in the FEMA teams. And they were there within hours to help. It was the mayor, the governor's wife, all the people you'll hear from tonight that really began to weave back hope into Oklahoma City. And as we look at all the things we've done over the past few months, getting ready for next weekend, we look at bringing a Kay Warren in to work with the families and survivors on grief. We look at going to the Capitol and planting a survivor tree on the grounds. We've done remarkable programming and better conversations of bringing people to the table to work through tough subjects and work past things that we may not agree about, but we can find common ground on our sacred ground. But most importantly, we've tried to celebrate the people. those who were killed, those who survived, those changed forever. And changed forever are the people you'll meet tonight, from the Clinton administration to the mayor and everyone in between. I've had a front row seat watching some incredible leadership over the last 29 years that I've had this job. And I've watched incredible, humble, brilliant people reshape our city and our state. And that doesn't just happen because you're Republican or Democrat. It happens because we're just good, hardworking people trying to get together. And so tonight, I hope as you hear these stories, you'll think back about how this unbelievable president who had no political gain to come to Oklahoma to help one bit gave it his all. And you'll hear about a governor who was his law school roommate who could come together and work through any differences, put those aside, and begin to rebuild our city. And you hear from a mayor who just led our way through our city and made things happen and still does, and has passed the gavel down now a couple of times, and to a mayor who can make the room come together when you cannot believe it's going to happen. So I really do hope tonight that we can just pause for a moment and put the noise aside and just think back 30 years about how this worked when nobody thought it could, when one of our own decorated soldiers thought he could come and divide us, but he united us. So I hope tonight you'll enjoy the stories. You'll be proud of how Republicans and Democrats, rich, poor, black, white, everyone in between figured out how to find common ground on that very sacred ground. Thank you for having us.
Tammy, you can see thick black smoke billowing from the Federal Court building downtown, and there's debris, glass, building matter spread on several downtown blocks. It looks as though emergency crews are on the scene trying to block off some downtown streets. Some workers are out of their building, and we can see glass blown out of other downtown office buildings about 5 blocks away. The explosion went off around 9 a.m. and we could feel the explosion in the newsroom of Channel 9. It shook the building, and so you can imagine what it did downtown. There is thick smoke still coming from the building, and on the ground I can see it looks like part of the building has been blown away. We'll have to back around to the other side so I can get a better view of it, but there's heavy damage downtown.
My experience was just immediately as I was turning to ask her what she needed, this tremendous roaring sensation was in my head. About 1 million things happened all at one instant. Everything went pitch black. This tremendous roaring that was so loud that I thought maybe what had happened, since I worked in a financial institution, I thought maybe a robbery had gone bad and maybe someone had come in from behind and maybe shot me in the head, because this feeling in my head. At the same time, there was like this rushing sensation, and I couldn't process it fast enough. I thought, well, I've been shot in the head, I'm dying, and this is that rushing through the tunnel, thing they talk about on TV, and, everything was pitch black. As I found out later, I was really sort of contorted in this strange position, almost upside down, and with about 10 feet of rubble on top of me, and was on the first floor. So, of course, this has happened so quickly, you can't process where you're at and what else happened. I basically tumbled with the building. The third and the fourth floor, literally the concrete third and fourth floor, broke off into a V and fell, and I fell with it at the bottom of it. And so then the rubble just sort of fell in and packed up on top of me. And I was still in my chair, amazingly. And it was filled with, I found out later from the rescuers that it was filled with a lot of office debris, like desk and, filing cabinets and that type of thing. Plus, literally the concrete floor was behind my back. I was kind of crunched in with that V.
Some of our first responding crews coming in never made it up to the building in those first few minutes because of the wounded that were walking down the street, that they had to stop and treat right there. So we tried our best to keep our system in place, what we call the incident command system. We tried to keep that in place and try to work through that. But in reality, it was chaos. There was just a lot of things going on.
What do you think motivated the people who raced into that building?
The same thing that motivates the civilians to run up in there and try to help. It's just the magnitude of that rubble pile and the remainder of the building, and the sounds and the voices and the yells that were coming out of that building. There wasn't any way you could have been out in front and not been motivated just to run up in there and just do whatever you could do. I think what people saw from around the country was what we knew or dealt with all along here in the heartland, middle America, whatever you want to call it, that this community showed the backbone of this area, and that is that you come together, you help people. The outpouring of the community, the handling of the situation, the fact that they pulled together, they handled the incident, the incident closed, and they tried their best to heal the community and go on with their business. I guess to say what hope there is, people ought to see that a community can do that people are still good and they still do that and still act that way, and hope that other communities, other people learn from that.
Y'all get to choose.
Gingerly.
All right, I see a giant time clock here saying we have 20 minutes, but I have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with you, Director Witt. You were one of the very first people on the ground in Oklahoma City after the bombing. Could you talk a little bit about the rescue and the recovery efforts during the first 2 weeks? And how did the local, state, and federal government work together during this tragedy?
Is this on?
I think, yes, it is.
When I arrived there, the smoke was still coming from out of the building. There was still some wounded people there as well. The Oklahoma Oklahoma search and rescue team did an unbelievable job in the fire department. I was amazed. And then, of course, you have to understand that event was one of the first events in our country where you had a terrorist event and a presidential disaster declaration at the same time. So usually on an event like that, the FBI takes the lead. But at this one, we took the lead. And we worked shoulder to shoulder with the FBI and the local law enforcement and each of the federal agencies. It was a partnership that come together that was unreal. The Oklahoma Search and Rescue, they were so well trained. They're an international team, and we saw that we were going to have some more teams. So we activated 14 more national search and rescue teams. And as the fire chief said, the incident command system was kind of shattered there for a while, but it came together. And what was really difficult was when you went in the building, you walked through the daycare center.
Oh.
Teddy bears and everything everywhere. And the firefighters, the search and rescue teams and the firefighters, that you couldn't put a machine in the building because it was so fragile. They carried thousands and thousands of tons of debris in 5-gallon buckets out of the middle of that building. to get to people. And it took me probably a year to open the cards that was sent to me. It took me quite a while to get where I could even talk about it. But I brought in Mark Galaducci out of California, who coordinated all of our national search and rescue teams. And we did it 12 hours on, 12 hours off on each team. But what was amazing, when I went over to where the search and rescue teams would take their shift break, the people of Oklahoma had set up a massage station, had set up an eye clinic, had set up everything that you could believe, and that on every bed, every time a team came in to sleep, there was a rose on the pillow. And on every table where they ate, there was cards, handwritten cards by kids and people every day, new cards to tell people how much they appreciated them. And we set up where we were having briefings every 12 hours. And one night, and I was there for every briefing. And one night when I was there, the Oklahoma City team hadn't come off of their shift yet. So I go through the daycare center down in what they call the hole, and to get the Oklahoma City team to come out because they'd been down there longer than they're supposed to. And they said, "We can't come out yet. We found a lady." And said, we want to show you. I can still see it today. There's a concrete pillar, and the floors were compacted down, and the only thing I could see was an arm sticking out, and with a gold watch band around her wrist. And anyway, it was, they said, "We're not leaving until we get her out." I said, "Okay." And so they didn't, but they did get her out. But what was very unusual is that there was 18 people we could not find. We didn't know where they were. And Mark Galaducci from California, he said, "You know Jack Dangerman?" I said, "Yes." He's Jack Dangerman owns Esri, the GIS systems of the world. And Jack's a good friend. And he said, "Why don't you get an Esri team to come down and let's take the blueprints of this building and run them through the GIS system and do an implosion using GIS." And we did that, and we found those 18 people in a conference room, sitting in their chairs around a conference table.
Wow.
And it was chilling. But I have to say this. If I'm talking too long, please tell me. But when President Clinton and First Lady came out there to the memorial, there was a guy that became a really good friend. He was from New York. Ray Downing was his name. He was a structural engineer for the search and rescue team from New York that was there. And he was so good. And anyway, when the President and First Lady was coming through the memorial, I had the team leaders lay the photos that they had on the conference table and to be able to brief the President and the First Lady. And I said, now, Ray, I said, I want you to stand up here next to me so I can personally introduce you to the President and First Lady. So they came in and I said, Mr. President, I said, First Lady, I said, this is Ray Downing. He's our structural engineer, and we could not have done this without him. And I said, the next time I'm in New York, I'm going to take him out to dinner. But he's going to have to take him damn cowboy boots off if he comes to New York. And President Clinton looked at Ray and he said, well, Ray, he never owned a pair of lace-up shoes till I brought him to Washington.
Thank you.
So it was, but it was the most outpouring of love I've ever witnessed in an event like this from people that live there.
It made a huge difference.
It was
to
a huge
everybody
difference.
that was getting up every day and working. This.
It was unbelievable, but it was. You know, the time I've been back was with President Clinton and Rodney. Mm-hmm. And each memorial, I think about it every year. And I think about going back. And I just haven't been able to do it.
I understand.
You know,
thank you for sharing your memories with us.
I got to say one more thing. Weldon Kennedy, the FBI guy, he was great to work with. He wanted me to activate DOD DMORT team where they could x-ray the bodies so they might find evidence. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, nope, we got to do it. So we did. And we was working in his office one day and just trying to come up with a sketch, you know, of what they thought that Timothy McVeigh might look like. And what was interesting, a young Oklahoma State police stopped a car on the interstate where the license tags had expired, and it was Timothy McVeigh.
Wow, that's amazing.
And he got what he deserved.
Yeah. Secretary Slater.
Sure.
In the aftermath of Oklahoma City, the Clinton administration had to address domestic terrorism, and they did so through the Anti-Terrorism Act of 1996 and pursuing other policies to protect America's critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about these policies and how infrastructure continues to play a role in combating terrorism today?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say that this was a federal building. I think it's important to underscore that because it affords me the opportunity to say that of the 168 souls lost, 11 were members of the Federal Highway Administration. And so an agency that's really not that large, it's about 5,000, to lose that many people, and to also know that on that very day, April 19th, 1995, it was the first day in the office for a division administrator who had been named by me, who had just met with his employees for the first time. And because he and one of the other assistants had to move to another part of the building for other activities, he was spared. And those with whom they had just been meeting, 11 of them, were lost. And I think that really speaks to sort of the uncertainty of it all when you can leave home expecting to put in a day's work, an honest day's work as a public employee, to give of your best as you do time and time again, with the expectation that you'll be able to go back home and to be with family and friends again. And we know that because of the actions of a demented individual, that was not to be the case. And so there was the darkness, but there was also the light. Part of that light involved tasking James Lee Witt and other members of the team, FBI, to work together with state and local government to do the job that had to be done. But it also involved engaging the Congress and putting in place legislation that was desperately needed to deal with a situation where it's a little hard to fathom that you can have the threat from within when you can almost readily acknowledge the threat from without. And that's what this anti-terrorism legislation was designed to do. And there was the bipartisanship that was in evidence. Actually, I believe on the Senate side, the measure was carried by Senator Dole, if I'm not mistaken, who in 97 would actually be in the presidential race as President Clinton was seeking a second term. But the point is, they were working together to get this important piece of legislation passed. It was very comprehensive. It actually built on a law that was passed in 1986 dealing with terrorism and how you would address it. But again, the focus was principally on dangers without rather than within. It's also important to note that President Clinton had actually submitted a somewhat similar piece of legislation earlier in the year because he recognized that the number one job of a president, frankly, is to keep the people safe. And so there had been the World Trade Center bombing a couple of years earlier, and he moved on a piece of terrorism legislation, I believe in like February or so. So this happens in April, and then they come back with a much more comprehensive measure. Beyond the anti-terrorism legislation that dealt with the roles of government, especially at the federal level, but the importance of that role being played out in partnership with state and local officials and with the private sector to some degree, especially as relates to transportation, because a great deal of our transportation facilities are actually privately owned, especially with your railroads. And so this legislation was designed to touch on all of that. There was also a commission that was established to focus on critical infrastructure, where we started to look at how you could shore up the infrastructure of the nation, our electric grid, our telecommunications system, our transportation system, oil and gas system, pipeline, all of those systems, how you could harden that so that you could withstand these kinds of challenges going forward. And I think there was a leader of the military, a General Marsh, who I believe headed that effort, but it involved, again, representatives from the state, local, and federal levels. And it also built on their being able to work together for good. I want to close with this, and because I know you have some other questions, but when it comes to transportation, and James Lee and I worked very closely on a number of disasters, whether they were man-made or natural. But transportation was considered function number one because of the search and rescue responsibilities. And then you've got the recovery that comes on after that. But it's really function number one, and it's very, very important. And that is the system, whether it was the roadways or the streets or whatever, whether it was the water system or the telecommunication system, but that's the collective system that was being used by the first responders, the communications between those working at the state and local levels. So how do you create resilience across those systems so that if tragedy strikes, you're able to communicate, you're able to respond, and you're able to deal with the challenges at hand? And so that's what the measure was all about. And it still serves us to this day, and it's a measure that's actually been enhanced post 9/11 as well.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
You sure may.
I'd like to add this. The governor and Kathy, I can't thank them enough for what they did for me out there. And the governor, I went to his office before I was leaving, and I was always wearing my cowboy boots and my Arkansas Razorback belt buckle. And the governor had about 5 belt buckles lined up on his desk, and he said, "Don't you come back out here wearing that Arkansas Razorback buckle." I'll never forget that. And thank Kathy for bringing her book by to me in Washington. The other is Albert Ashwood and Gary and Fire Chief, and everybody was just, I'm talking about just fabulous to work with. And but the guy that I mentioned to you earlier, Ray Downing from New York, Ray was going to retire. He went back to New York, and later they had his retirement party, and we were at the farm and was getting ready to fly back that day, and that's when 9/11 happened. And Ray had already retired, but Ray was one of the first firefighters in that first building, and Ray did not make it.
Oh, wow.
But Congressman Steve Israel, he wanted me to do a security event on Long Island, and he knew Ray really well and knew his family. So he set up a lunch with his 2 sons who were firefighters and their kids and their whole family, and we had lunch with them and got to share stories and me learn more about him and his family. So it was interesting time.
I think I have time to ask you all both one sort of final question. Secretary Slater, obviously the bombing was one of the darkest times in our nation's history. Could you tell me what during that period that you can remember gave you hope? And are there any specific stories or anything you want to share that you haven't already discussed?
Well, just seeing the way the country was able to come together in a very powerful way. And I know you're going to hear more later about the speech that the president gave 4 days later. The significance of that words, but how they serve to pull us together. And words that would quote the governor, as I recall, where he was actually saying, if you want to see what goodness is all about, come to Oklahoma. I mean, that's something very, very powerful. That's how you see the light through the darkness. And also, the acknowledgement that a lot had been lost, too much, but that all had not been lost. And a little Tennyson there. Yes. And that with that which has not been lost, you can build. And I remember one point that was made in particular was the fact that you have not lost America, that America is here for you. And that was that unifying nature, I think, of the expression and the speech. And it was very, very powerful. And to be here 30 years later, we have not forgotten.
We haven't.
We continue to keep Oklahoma City in our thoughts and prayers. And I saw a little fact that I'll mention to maybe close my comments with this. I know we made a commitment that all of the children of the 11 Federal Highway Administration staffers, that we would help to pay for their schooling. And it was thought that you'd need a program that would go at least until 2018 to cover them through college. When I saw it, I said to myself, that was just a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And what it really underscores is how young some of those children were who lost their parents. And so, yes, too much was lost, but much abides. And if you can make a commitment to be there when needed in the same way that a parent would be there, then you're keeping the spirit of that person alive. And I know that Oklahoma City is committed to that. I know that Oklahoma committed to that. And I know that our nation remains committed to that as well.
Thank you. James Lee, before we close, you talked earlier about how the support of the people and just sort of the love and care that they gave to all the first responders inspired you and others to keep going. Is there any other story that gave you hope during that period? Any stories of heroism that were particularly meaningful?
When I think Rodney, the governor, President Clinton, and I was standing there, and this little boy, about 6 or 7 years old, and his dad, he was a survivor, and he had gone through 6 or 7 surgeries on his head, and he would pick up a rock and throw it. And President Clinton just really it was just a joyful moment for that little kid to be able to do what he was doing by throwing a rock, you know? Yeah. And he said, don't do that. His dad said, don't do that, don't do that. The president's here. President Clinton laughed and he'd just pick another rock up. But it was just little moments. And one other moment real quick is we went over to a church that the people were at, and they had counselors there, and the prayers that were said, and it was amazing. I'm talking about heartfelt caring that you could just feel. It just resonated, and it took me a while. Now I'm just telling you, as many of you probably it took you a while, but we were going to a little Baptist church in Old Town Alexandria, and the pastor said, we're having a men's meeting tomorrow morning. Would you be able to come and share about Oklahoma City bombing? I said, I don't know. And this was about a year later. Mm-hmm. And so I went and shared my feelings and thoughts, and then he convinced me to share it with the church. And what was important was to share with them not how many victims we brought out of that building, but how much love and care was in that city that helped everybody else that was there helping the injured, and as well as the ones that lost their life and the families that lost loved ones. It was hard.
Well, I think you both have underscored what obviously a tragic time, but the hope, the resilience, from the people themselves helped you get through it. And I think still today is a reminder how we can all work together. It is possible to come together in times of tragedy, but just in everyday life. You know, how we all can treat people as human beings. You know, one thing President Clinton says that resonates with me often is that our common humanity is more important than our interesting differences. I think we all need to have more common humanity today, and I really appreciate both of you sharing some of your own humanity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, those of us who are believing people believe that good can come from evil. And in the case of Oklahoma City, good clearly came from evil. And I really think that if I had lost a loved one instead of a friend, and I lost a number of friends, that looking down from paradise, I'd say, look, this isn't a horrible, evil thing, that good should come from it. Because of the Oklahoma City tragedy, people looked at themselves, if you will, on television and saw a highly gifted, highly competent, highly educated, highly articulate, highly spiritual, highly motivated and successful community that ought to be a first world city. And Oklahoma City now is considered one of the best places to establish a small business, one of the best places to live, and it's not by accident. I think after that evil, good came. People saw that they could stitch together, come together, do well together, and as a result, I think the city is a much better place.
Today, I've been joined by the First Lady and by children of people who work for our federal government, because we are especially concerned about how the children of America are reacting to the terrible events in Oklahoma City. Our family has been struggling to make sense of this tragedy, and I know that families all over America have as well. We know that what happened in Oklahoma is very frightening, and we want children to know that it's okay to be frightened by something as bad as this.
But you know, whenever you feel scared or worried, I want you to remember that your parents and your friends and your family members all love you and are going to do everything they can to take care of you and to protect you. That's really important for each of you to know. I also want you to know that there are many more good people in the world than bad and evil people. Just think of what we have seen in the last few days. Think of all the police officers and the firefighters, the doctors and the nurses, all of the neighbors and the rescue workers, all of the people who have come to help all of those who were hurt in Oklahoma.
When I first heard about it, I thought, who would want to do that to Kate, who had never done anything to him?
It's hard to imagine, isn't it?
That's very hard to imagine. There are some people who get this idea in their minds that that people have done something to them when they haven't done anything to them, and who are told over and over again that it's okay to hate, it's okay to hate, it's okay to lash out, even at people they don't even know. And that's a wrong idea. That's the other thing I want to say to you. We need to all respect each other and treat each other with respect and be tolerant of our differences, so that we don't have other people developing this crazy attitude that it's okay to hurt people you never even knew. Today, our nation joins with you in grief. We mourn with you. We share your hope against hope that some may still survive. We thank all those who have worked so heroically to save lives and to solve this crime. Those here in Oklahoma and those who are all across this great land, and many who left their own lives to come here to work hand in hand with you. We pledge to do all we can to help you heal the injured, to rebuild this city, and to bring to justice those who did this evil. But you have not lost everything, and you have certainly not lost America, for we will stand with you for as many tomorrows as it takes.
thanks to you all for coming to Little Rock and coming to the Clinton Presidential Center for this event. And I want to start with Governor Keating. Within hours of the bombing, you realized that recovery and healing was essential. It had to be a priority of yours as governor. And could you talk a little bit about why you realized that and why it was so important to create unity even in those first hours after the bombing?
Well, to our Arkansas friends who would not know this, I had been governor just for a few months, January, and this tragedy occurred on April 19th. So I had a very sketchy knowledge of who I think was one of the best mayors in America, Ron Norick, who is here with us today, the mayor of Oklahoma City. And I also had a sketchy knowledge of the fire chief, the police chief. There were 1,000 firefighters were then in Oklahoma City, 1,000 police officers. Obviously, someone not from there, I had very limited knowledge of those individuals. And the only person I knew pretty well was my partner, Kathy, and also the National Guard commander, who I had recently appointed, who was a 2-star general and basically took off his Air Force uniform and put on the National Guard commander uniform and helped us with extraordinary skill in figuring out what do you do with victims? How do you use the military, their identification expertise, and things like that to help us? But it was the morning after the bombing that I knew what our role, Kathy's and my role, and what my role had to be, because we went down to the site. The FEMA Urban Search and Rescue individuals that James Lee Witt and President Clinton had directed to help us had arrived, or a number of them had arrived. So here it was, misty, black, pre-dawn day, searchlights all over that building, and of course, rubble everywhere. The building had been blasted in half. And I saw coming up the street a firefighter, and I didn't recognize his uniform. He obviously was a member of a FEMA unit. So what does a governor do? I stepped out into the street and I said, "Thank you so much for being here." And he looked at me and he said, "Who are you?" You got to be embarrassed at a time like this. But anyway, he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the governor of Oklahoma." You would think he would more than likely probably say, "Hi, nice to meet you," and go on up the street. He didn't. He stopped and he took his finger and he punched me in the chest. And with anger and panic and terrible discomfort on his face, he said, "Well, then you find out who did this, because the only thing I pulled from that rubble was a child's finger and an American flag." And he stormed on up the street. What did that say to me? PTSD cubed, exclamation mark. This guy probably was a young dad, and he was completely broken in half because of what he saw. Unlike 9/11, where most all the victims were just powder. Oklahoma City, everybody was there. All those children on park benches, all these individuals that should have been with us today. So Kathy and I talked later, and I said, we need to be with them. When these people come off their duty tour, we need to say, "Thank you for being here." Make sure they have an excellent meal. That was pre-cell phone days. So they can make calls to their families. They can have new equipment. They can have new boots. Their dogs, their search and rescue dogs, would have new boots, and they would have laundry done. Whatever they needed would be done. And that was the beginning of what we call the Oklahoma Standard, but it was an obligation of us to thank you who came to help us, to risk your life and your treasure to help us. And it was a lesson I never forgot.
Great. So, Mrs. Keating, you were obviously, you played a variety of roles during this period and the years after, but in those early days, you had a special role in developing and planning the prayer service. And can you tell us a little bit about the planning of that service? Obviously, I understand there were some moments of resistance in some of the conversations about it. Tell us a little bit about that and how you were able to use that event to help create some spirit of hope and healing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight and helping us keep the story of the Oklahoma City alive and in your memory so that we can continue to do our good work to make a difference and keep this from happening again. The prayer service actually came about the night of the bombing because Frank, as you mentioned, had only been in office for a little over 3 months. And as Mrs. Huckabee, who's in the audience, will tell you, as a first lady or first spouse, as the case may be, you don't have a job description. You're just married to the person who was elected, and you write your own, whether you want one or not. And so I really hadn't figured out yet what I was going to do, and this happened. And so I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and every time I opened, picked up the phone and said, we need water down at the site, the radio would come on and say, don't send any more water. We're overwhelmed with water. Or we don't need any more people at the blood bank. And I'd have to call people back and say, don't go to the blood bank. And because that was the Oklahoma way. And so I was on the phone with my friend. I said, I just don't know how to help. Like every other person, I think in Oklahoma City for sure, probably in Oklahoma and many Americans. And she said, well, Kathy, if you weren't First Lady, what would you do? And I said, I'd have a prayer service. And she said, well, why don't you have a prayer service? And that night, the prayer service was born. And I think you have to go back a little bit in history and look at Oklahoma was a state where people could come for free land. We had the Trail of Tears. People were sent there against their will. People came there because it was their last hope at the American dream. And what happened, I believe, is they forged a sense of community and togetherness from the beginning of our state. And that community survived tornadoes, droughts, the recessions and depressions, et cetera, et cetera. And so when a tragedy like Oklahoma City happened, and I said I wanted to put on a prayer service, the help just came in bundles. The help came to the site in bundles. People kept giving of themselves at every turn of the corner. I called Laura Bush at 10:30 at night because I'd just been with her at a First Ladies Conference, and she'd invited me to go to a Billy Graham revival. And so I met Billy and Ruth Graham that night, and I said, well, I'm going to call and invite him to come speak. And called Laura, got her out of bed, and she said, Kathy, it's 11 o'clock at night, and he's in bed. So the next morning, she called me back, gave me the number, and I called him. He'd been sick all week. He came. You asked about resistance. I had decided because it was a federal building and because so many agencies had been in that building, and we didn't know how many people were still alive, how many were dead because we were in the rescue mode. So I decided that we were going to call the President of the United States. And I mentioned this to several people. Frank was only the third Republican governor. There was resistance. People said, he's a Democrat. I said, there's no room for politics. There's no room. We don't know who's in this building. Doesn't matter if they're Republican and Democrat, Catholic or Jew or Muslim or Baptist, rich or poor, black or white. We're all one family. And thus, for the prayer service, that was our philosophy. And 4 days later, the president and Mrs. Clinton did come. All the cabinet secretaries representing the different offices in the building were present. And the rest is history. I think it was, in my mind, the beginning of healing because it was a sign of hope. And we all came together, and it was a spiritual experience. And I'm really so grateful for everybody, the many people that put that together and made that happen.
Great. Thank you so much. So Don Bear, you had this unique opportunity of really spending a tremendous amount of time with the president during the days after this national tragedy. And so first off, what was that experience like? But then you are also given this responsibility, this duty, it was your job to help craft some words, help him think through how to communicate about these events. And of course, we see a series of communications, including this tremendously important speech at the prayer service. Could you just talk a little bit about those days and your work during those days?
Sure, thank you. First thing I want to say is what an honor it is to be here today with the Keatings, with everyone else who participated firsthand and led in a firsthand way. I also want to say, I can't believe it's 30 years. I mean, who else is sitting here thinking, what? But it's hard to imagine. I feel like I've been given more credit than I deserve. First off, the answer to the question, anytime one is asked who wrote that speech for the president, is President Clinton wrote those speeches. And that would be the answer, even if I knew that he insisted that that would be the answer. But the other thing about writing, speech writing, especially in this context, is it's a team sport. It's always a team sport. And the president, President Clinton, in many respects, is the GOAT, the greatest of all time, certainly in this context, as a person who was able to embody the emotions and the spirit and the sense of things and be able to deliver. My role then as chief speechwriter was sort of as a player coach. And I would write some things, but I also would always try to be a semi-intelligent sponge because there are lots of words and ideas and things that are sort of circulating in a moment like this. This one in particular, as I remember it. And if I had any skill whatsoever, it would be to recognize that something, was worth sort of pulling into this tapestry that we were trying to weave. And it began instantly. A speechwriter named Jonathan Prince, who Stephanie and others will remember, and I, while Stephanie and her team were in the West Wing planning out what we would be doing for the next week, Jonathan and I were in the what we call the OEOB, which is the old executive office building, offices, which were the worst offices in the White House complex. And we were working on something else when we saw on CNN what had happened. And true to form, all of the decision makers in the White House, which we were not part of, were in the chief of staff's office trying to absorb all of this. And then they moved to the Situation Room in the White House complex. No one called Jonathan and me that there was a need for the president to make remarks, but we figured there would be, and we better get ready for it. And so he and I together started writing what became the statement that he made in the late afternoon of April 19th in the press briefing room in the White House. And I think there the tone was set. And again, to give credit where it is due, the president brought that tone. It was a tone of strength and resolution and empathy brought together in one place so that the country and Oklahoma City could be reinforced and buttressed during an unprecedented moment. And I do want to say that Jonathan and I eventually got called over to the Situation Room. Unfortunately, we had a piece of paper with something on it that we could give because he was going to go out in any moment to do this. He took it, if you go back and look to which I've done lately, back into the records, he wrote through about half of it with his left hand, as he would do, and made it in his voice, as it should be. As we were walking out of the sit room, there was a phone call that came in. It was as we walked by one of the smaller officers in the complex. It's called the Situation Room. And it was First Lady Hillary Clinton, who was elsewhere, I think, in the complex, who had called to find him. We had written a line about how the actions of these cowards will not stand. And he went into this little room and he took some notes. We weren't in the room with him, and he came out. And that line became evil cowards. And so this notion that this was an evil that had been perpetrated came from the combination of Bill and Hillary Clinton together. As you note, you see, there was the radio address with the children, which we needed to get ready for, and that was unusual. I think that was the first time they had ever done a joint radio address, and so we needed to write for both of them. You see, as they were giving it, they had paper there, so we had worked to sort of make that happen. A couple of days later. Extraordinary moment, I remember it vividly, and I remember the child asking about planting a tree. And as you know, before they left the White House complex on Sunday, the 23rd, the Clintons planted a dogwood tree. And that's my only contribution to the horticulture of the White House. I recommended, or I urged, that it become a dogwood tree. Full disclosure, I was born and raised in North Carolina, and the dogwood is the state tree of North Carolina. But it also, to me, represented a great deal about redemption. I'm Jewish, but the flower of the dogwood tree has the sign of the cross in it. And dogwoods are tender plants, as it turns out, but they are also very deep in terms of their roots and how they reach. And to me, symbolically, it represented something. And I'm also very proud to say that dogwood is still there and is thriving, even as they have taken down just this week the Jackson magnolia, the dogwood that was planted on April the 23rd, 1995 is still there. So then for the memorial service, I mean, again, working to get to that, we really didn't turn to it until Friday night because we had so many other things that we were doing. And a couple of speechwriters were working on it. And then on that Saturday afternoon, it fell to Jonathan Prince and me to basically try to pull it together. Again, giving credit where it's due. I think perhaps to me, two of the most resonant lines in there, in addition to Governor Keating's words, were, number one, the quote from Proverbs, "Those who trouble their own house shall inherit the wind," which Jonathan Prince came rushing into my office with, and we knew that had to be there. But the other one that is really the spine of the speech, "You have lost much, but you have not lost everything. You have not lost America," came from Michael Sheehan, who was the president's speech coach. We would have someone who would, for big speeches, who would come in and help prep him. And Michael, who was a wonderful man of words. And again, when I heard it, I knew instantly that really needed to be the pivot point of the speech. It was a remarkable thing to put it together. Stephanie made sure that there was a tiny space for me on Air Force One to come down to Oklahoma City because she knew that the president was going to be working on that speech until the moment we landed. And so I was there with him in order to do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Don. And obviously those days and those words really helped to redefine the Clinton presidency. I mean, it was a crucial few days. I mean, it was a different presidency after.
Can I speak to that for a minute? Mm-hmm. I've gone back and I've thought about this. I came into the administration later than others. I had been a journalist covering Governor Bill Clinton when he ran for president and was drawn to him and had written about him and certain aspects of his life that were outside of politics that he appreciated that I had sort of focused on. And so we had built a relationship, and then it was not until a year into the presidency that I was offered the opportunity to come in to be the speechwriter. What had drawn me to him, And again, we were these two baby boomer Southerners with a certain perspective. But what had drawn me to him was his voice, his ability to speak to the heart and the soul of the country. And it's almost inevitable when people go into office, when they go into the presidency, they're drawn into the detail of policy and the back and forth of politics, and that speaking to the heart and the soul tends to get a bit muted. And when I did a quick interview with him in the Oval Office before I took the job in early 1994, I asked him, did he still, because we had talked about this before when he was running for office, did he still want to speak to the heart and soul of the country? And he said, absolutely, I do. And I think he also recognized I was saying, well, you're not doing it as much now. And I would tell you that I think this was the moment when he found his voice again, and when the country was able to have the advantage, the benefit of that voice and what it meant. And there were a series of things that happened within 16 days in April of 1995. Number one, he gave a speech on April the 7th in Dallas to the American Society of Newspaper Editors, which was a very big moment in which he laid out where he was ready to cooperate with the new Republican Congress. And he said in there, I was not sent here to stack up a pile of vetoes. I was sent here to get things done for the American people, and here are the things we can do, number one. Number two, 30 years ago tomorrow, April 12th, 1995, was the 50th anniversary of the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the President Clinton, went to Warm Springs, Georgia, to the Little White House there to commemorate that. And he gave a speech there, and when he ended that speech, in which he said, when Franklin Roosevelt died here in Warm Springs, and they put his casket on the train to make the long journey from here in rural Georgia back up to Washington, where he would lie in state, people of all types, of all sort of statures and status in society and in their communities came out to the railroad to watch him go by and to pay tribute to Franklin Roosevelt, because they knew that he had stood with them and they were there to stand with him at the end. And he ended the speech by saying, that was Franklin Roosevelt's contract with America. Let that be our contract with America, which, if you remember that time in political history, was a very important thing. 5 days later, the bombing in Oklahoma City and everything that followed from that, and this speech there at the memorial service that I do think was a turning point, certainly for him, but I think as much as anything for the country.
So we're short on time, but I want to get back to the Keatings and talk about this sense of unity and hope and healing. And we're 30 years later, and the question is, to what degree and how has Oklahoma and Oklahoma City kept that spirit alive across those decades? Either one of you or both of y'all, your thoughts on that?
Well, every city has, and every state and every country has a renaissance if they're well governed. A lesson I learned from the Oklahoma City bombing was you better have the best and the brightest people from both parties participating in natural or man-made disasters. Otherwise, people will be shattered and they won't be able to get up off their knees. Well, Oklahoma City, and I was not from, nor Kathy from Oklahoma City, really it was remarkable to me how the city found its sea legs. It began to think of itself as a city that could respond well to a horrible, absolutely unspeakable disaster. And the later FEMA officials, the best, of course, James Lee Witt, but later FEMA officials said to me, your state and your city, we let you guys handle it because you all were extraordinarily competent. You knew exactly what should be done, and you did it. Well, the people picked this up, and a and I think, Mayor Holt will agree with me here, with all of these, and Mayor Norick, all of these citywide votes to transform the city, schools, venues for athletics and sports. Here, the first time ever, Oklahoma City is going to play a role in the next Olympic Games. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens by the city having a great deal of pride in what it was able to accomplish in a calamity. That we made the decision to take these contributions that came in spontaneously, that if you lost your children, we would bury your children and give you whatever counseling you needed or desired. But if your children lost you, we would put those children through college and graduate school anywhere they wanted to go. And I've had more people come up to me here 30 years later and say, thank you, sir, I became a doctor. I became a nurse. Service, they saw the generosity and the goodness and the goodwill and the caring and the courage of the leadership, and they decided they wanted to participate as well. And it really is remarkable to see that miraculous result. You want to add something, Kath?
I would just echo, we've talked a lot about the leadership during the rescue and recovery of Oklahoma City, but there was a sense of community, leadership in the community that was so far extended. The tentacles run today so deep, starting with, and you're about to hear the next generation of hope and healing in our community that continues today. But that sense of leadership and inclusion, there was a sense of compassion that never went away, a sense of collaboration that never went away, and a sense of community that came out of that and continues to be stronger and better today. We're still recovering. It's 30 years later, and we might forgive, but we don't forget. But we do it in a civil and a unified and a loving way as we continue to heal. And I wish the country would take a look at the lessons from Oklahoma City. We're not perfect, and we have our own challenges, but I do think the sense of civility and love is extraordinary. And I think it's birthed from our beginnings, but it really came to light during the Oklahoma City bombing when we put the heart in the heartland. So
beautiful. Thank you all for a great conversation.
The force of the blast blew off the axle of the truck, I think almost 2 football fields away, landed on a car, which was unfortunate for the people in the car, although fortunate nobody was hurt. But it was fortunate for us because it drew immediate attention to what had happened with respect to the that was going to be likely to be part of the vehicle that blew up. If you have the axle, if you have the license plate, either of those two were excellent. Obviously, very important pieces. The contents of the envelope that Trooper Hanger found in the car, various of his comments, McVeigh's comments on them. I don't know if the credit card, I think it was a Spotlight credit card or something, is still available. Then eventually this led us to Nichols, and Nichols had in his house I think he had Krugerrands, and around them wrapped a receipt for 2,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate. That was another, if you have the receipt, that was an awfully important piece of evidence, which took us to the Mid-Kansas Co-op, I think, where people were able to identify both the two of them. So, I was an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. I've seen a number of murders up close. This was, he was just cold, stone cold is the only way you can describe it. It just seemed without particular emotion. That was all there was to it. This is the central thing. most significant thing I worked on. It was the thing that I feel like I was able to make the biggest personal contribution to something. Lots of things lawyers work on, they don't feel like, in the end, you don't know whether it makes any difference or not. And I think any other people could have done the same, but I think that being there makes you feel like, you had a role to play in the investigation and helping pull people together. And it's a very satisfying feeling.
Already know that Timothy McVeigh has been found guilty on 11 indictments. Now, this jury, when they come back, can either agree on all 11 indictments with the same penalty, or they can go indictment by indictment, giving him a different sentence. Based on our consideration, the jury recommends, by unanimous vote, that the following sentence. He is sentenced to death. Ladies and gentlemen, from the jury just now, the verdict that he shall be sentenced to death, it is unanimous. You can hear applause breaking out here. It is the finding of all of the jurors that we're getting the word from the courtroom right now that Timothy McVeigh be sentenced to death.
But the verdict doesn't diminish the great sadness that occurred in Oklahoma City 2 years ago. Our only hope is that the verdict will go some way to preventing such a terrible, drastic crime from ever occurring again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Holt, Dr. Chambers, and Mayor Nork. Mayor Nork, let's start with you. We've heard a lot about the strength and the resilience, but let's talk about the hope. I remember one night you put together a 350-member task force, and it actually worked. People actually worked and got along. If you have never worked with 350 people once, you should try it. But you believed in that.
I did believe it. And let me say one thing before I don't want to forget it is, Governor, I think what made our whole operation work is there's no turf battles between the state and the city. And that was vitally important. We worked together. He'd been in office 4 months.
100 days, I think.
And I had luckily I was in my third term, which was very helpful. We just had sworn in two new council people a week before, and I was thinking, I didn't run that at that time, but if there had been a new mayor, what a time to be a new mayor. So luckily I had about 9 years experience by the time this all came around, which really made a big difference. But it was difficult, this committee, and the committee you're talking about is for the memorial itself.
The task force.
There was still some very raw feelings, as you can imagine. I remember I went to the first meeting, and Philip Thompson, who lost his mother, was there kind of helping organize the meeting. And if it weren't for him and his brother, I'm not sure the memorial would have ever happened, or at least it wouldn't have happened quickly. And because the emotion from the people, and there was probably 3 times as many people that are sitting here tonight there that night, families and relatives, and this was approximately, I'm going to say, a couple months.
July, yeah.
Yeah, a couple, 3 months afterwards. And they were so, their feelings were, we, the political people, are doing this for us. And that is the last thing that we wanted. And the only reason that I formed the committee that quick, because I didn't even want to do it that quick, but I heard through kind of the grapevine, there was about 3 different groups of people all wanting to do a committee. And I thought, well, I know that's not going to work. So I captured a gentleman I did not know, a guy by the name of Bob Johnson, an attorney in Oklahoma City. And he came to my office and volunteered to head up a task force to do this. And I didn't know Mr. Johnson from anybody. So after he left, I did a little research to figure out who he is and figured out, he's a real deal.
Real guy.
And I appointed him, then we appointed a task force. And really, all the families, everybody was kind of part of it, but the task force was large. But it took several meetings before it ever got to where it almost wasn't hostile. And it was interesting. And I didn't want to be in the front of that. I kept wanting.
You always stayed in the back.
Yeah, this isn't about me. This is about the families. And if the families don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. There's just no doubt about that. So that's kind of how it started. And you can imagine the emotions a few months after, how raw they have to be with people that either lost children or lost mothers, dads, sisters, brothers, whatever, wives, husbands, whatever it was.
Well, incredible leader. I just remember you always being in the back and letting the people do the work. And I have to say about you and Governor Keating, politics never got in the way. You just let the people handle it, and you guys were there to support us. And I think that is something we don't always see in cities that are dealing with tragedy. So I talk about that all over the world, and I applaud both of you for that. Dr. Chambers, you ran to the site as a doctor, and today you lead the memorial and museum. And 30 years later, how does all this weave together? How does the story come together 30 years later?
It is amazing to spend 30 years, absolutely. I'm a OBGYN, so I was in my office that day and ran to the hospital that was closest to my office, hoping to care for people. But the majority of the people cared for down nearest the site. I did work in the medical tents in those days afterwards, and like I think you described, the smoke and the gray and the spotlights, and it was like a very, very eerie movie set, except it was incredibly real and incredibly tragic. And it's there that I was able to help care for first responders, firemen, EMTs, all the construction crews, everybody that worked down there for days and days and days and days that still needed care, medical care and everything else. So it was really important for me to participate in that way then, as little as I believe I did. It was still important for me to give back in that way. And now it's even more incredible for me to give back in a leadership role as the chairman of the board. This is an amazing organization to work with. I was interviewed the other day, and a couple of times recently, actually, and they asked, why 30 years? Why is it still so important? And I still struggle with why folks maybe outside of Oklahoma City and Oklahoma don't understand why it is still so important, why what happened is still so relevant, why senseless acts of violence are never the answer, why coming together as a community and as a people of hope is always the right answer. So I hope I said that to those people that interviewed me, and I hope that's what you'll hear from all of us tonight. That's what the museum does as well. We start out by taking you through what happened, and we hope that by the time you get through the end of the museum, you come out with a real sense of hope and of what you can do to make a difference in the world and practice the Oklahoma Standard as well.
Mayor Holt, you were in high school, freshman, I think, 8th grade, 9th grade, sophomore, okay. But yeah, and so you came to the mayor's seat a few years later, but you've inherited a different city than it was in 1995. And how do we continue to teach a city that can be rebuilt and find hope?
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I realize now, I guess being the last new person to speak of the evening, I sort of do represent the future, the present, and I'm also the only person you'll hear from tonight that really experienced this at a greater distance than everybody else you've heard from. I was living in Oklahoma City. I'm born and raised in Oklahoma City, but I was in high school and experienced it as many other hundreds of thousands of people in the area did, as this, shocking and life-changing event, but didn't obviously have this level of involvement until later in life. And as Carrie says, here's what I've inherited as mayor of Oklahoma City for the last 7 years. I have inherited a city that's really in a renaissance. That, if you haven't picked up on it, the tagline of the memorial this past year has been "One day of darkness and 30 years of light." And that's more than a euphemism. I mean, we can prove it to you. I mean, it really has been a remarkable time in our city's history since this horrible, terrible, awful day. it's been alluded to already. I mean, we're going to host Olympic events in 2028. We've got the world's greatest basketball team right now. We're building a billion-dollar arena. You know, we're the 20th largest city in the United States. We were like the 35th largest city in 1995. I mean, there's just this amazing upswing that the city is on. It's the it city in America, and we think it will be for years to come. And so I've inherited that, but I think a lot of that is built on this narrative, right? I mean, I think this is obviously part of our story, and this Renaissance is a reaction to it. It is years of light, but we created that light. We wanted to have a reaction. We wanted to build something great out of this horrible act, and so we've also utilized to create that light a unique political culture, and that's been alluded to as well. I think, particularly by First Lady Kathy Keating, you know, and I try to cultivate that as the leader of this city. I try to remind people that we have to work together, and that we came out of April 19th, 1995 completely united. That's what we were doing thanks to the leadership of people like Mayor Norick and Governor Keating, but the President Clinton was doing an excellent job of that as well on the national level. And we didn't care in that moment what political party you were. That was, by the way, the exact opposite reaction that was intended by the act, right? The act was intended to spark a civil war. And leaders at the local, state, and federal level ensured that that didn't happen. And in fact, we came out of it united. And here in Oklahoma City today, we passed things with 70+%. And I'm going to tell you that, as far as I'm concerned, that's 100%. I'm in politics. Like, that's as good as it gets. And we pass things time and time again with 70+%. We elect mayors with 70+%. We are like moving forward with a great consensus. And by the way, in a very, like, in the current political vernacular, a very purpley city, right? Like this, the county that we're in voted 49-48 in the last two presidential elections. So people who are Republicans, Democrats, and Independents in Oklahoma City are voting the same way on the same day on a lot of things, candidates and issues. And that doesn't feel like that's happening anywhere else, but I think it's grounded in a reaction to 1995 that I certainly, as mayor, try to continue. And so, yeah, I think that's how, I think we have a lot of hope in Oklahoma City, and I think we're very intentional about tying it back to these events, and we try to, obviously, through the memorial and the museum, tell that story to inspire our local residents, and also, hopefully, to teach some lessons to the rest of the country and the world.
Dr. Chambers, this time next week, we'll have thousands of people in Oklahoma City, many families, survivors, first responders, President Clinton. We'll have the Mayor Norick and Governor Keating and our current Governor Stitt and Mayor Holt. We'll have a different set of folks there. What do we hope people leave Oklahoma City with next week as they go through the ceremony and go through the events of the day and spend time in the museum? What is it we hope people leave with?
Well, I hope one of the things that they will leave with is not just the beautiful ceremony and not just the beautiful grounds and not the, I know, eloquent words that will come from Mayor Holt and President Clinton and Governor Stitt, but I hope they will leave with the recognition that those chairs that will be in the background of that represent people that just were going about an ordinary day, just like we do every day, and then their lives are turned upside down. I hope they'll leave with that sense of commitment to never letting that happen again. I hope it's a very meaningful experience for them, but I hope they take it personally to then impact it in their own lives, even little situations, like you said, in just everyday life, because that's where it starts, and then you can also apply it to bigger things. That's what I hope they take.
That's great. Mayor Norick, you bridged the divide. You were able to do that in the early days. You brought people together. How do you look back then and look at our city today? And what do you see?
I see a city really united. You know, we've been very fortunate, and I'm talking about the city itself. And I don't hope this doesn't sound braggadocious, but starting with me and with Mayor Humphreys, Mayor Cornett, Mayor Holt, we have all had the same path, and it's worked. And that's unusual. Most of the time when you have an election at whatever office, whoever the new incoming person is, is going to go a direction. But we've just had that city, and I mean, to think about 2 Olympic events, or there's actually 7 Olympic events, LA Lincoln Olympic events in 2028. Is that right? 2028.
Yeah.
Coming to Oklahoma City. That's unbelievable. I mean, would I have thought about that 30 years ago? Absolutely not. No. And
But
so,
you started the penny sales tax that turned it around.
well, we did do that. Yeah. In fact, about 16 months prior to this particular event, we passed the first MAPS tax, which you probably don't know what that is, but that was a penny dedicated to public buildings for the betterment of Oklahoma City. These were buildings that were all owned by the city, operated by the city, that were just deteriorating to nothing. And our quality of life was, I mean, our city was dying, absolutely dying in the mid 80s. And we passed the city up, somehow convinced the voters to pass a 1-cent sales tax to build $350 million worth of projects. Mayor Holt just finished one that's going to be $1 billion, and that's about that'd be the 5th one. You count MAPS 4 and then the new arena. That'd be like MAPS 4. All carry votes, 60, 70, 80% to fund, but these are all self-funding. And when the tax runs out, like in 5 years, we had to come up, if we wanted to come up with new projects, we did, and the voters keep passing them. So it's not a permanent tax. It's been permanent for 30-some years, but the people keep approving it on 5 or 7 year deals. But
And that's part of the unity.
yeah, but let me. I want to say something about President Clinton. I mean, he was. People have asked me about President Clinton, and I am so happy to say how wonderful he was, not only to me but to my city. I'm Republican. Luckily, on our city council, we run nonpartisan, which I love. I mean, I think I like that idea. And I'm not a far right Republican. I'm kind of a moderate Republican, but I'm still a Republican. But his kindness that he showed, his generosity he showed, and I didn't know, obviously, a mayor from Oklahoma City wouldn't have known the president. I knew who he was, but I didn't know the president by any means. When he came to the memorial service that Kathy and Frank put together, I shook hands, but that was, kind of it. Well, it was about somewhere that next week, so it had to be somewhere around 5 or 6 days, 4 days after the memorial service, which would have made it a week or so after the bombing. I get home at night about 11 o'clock, and phone rings, and it's this lady. She said, "This is the White House operator. Have you got a minute to speak to the president?" Any other time you'd probably think this is a prank call. It's all there is to it. So of course I say yes. And about 5 seconds later, "Mayor, this is Bill Clinton. I just want to know how you're doing. I just wanted to call to see how you're doing. Is there anything I can do for you?" I mean, and I'm almost speechless, but I'm not speechless, but I'm almost speechless. I say, "Well, Mr. President, what a nice thing for you to do." And we talked for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And when you consider getting to talk to the president for 2 or 3 minutes, that's a long time, And finally, probably shouldn't have said this. And I said, "Mr. President, where are you?" I mean, that's none of my business where he was. And he says, "Well, I'm actually sitting in the back of a limo in Des Moines, Iowa, and I've just had an event, and I'm just getting ready to go into the hotel for the evening, and I just wanted to call and see how you were doing." Wow. And I said, and to this day, that's the best phone call I've ever had in my life. And if you give me a second, can I tell one more story?
Yeah. Just time.
Yeah, good timing. And so I'm fortunate enough then, after that time, I'm in the White House several times working on the relief package and stuff like this with Leon Panetta and Henry Cisneros and their staff. And this was, I think, the second time I'd been in the White House, and the first time the president invited me into the Oval Office, which was fantastic and took some pictures. I have some pictures in my office now of that wonderful event. But anyway, so around a conference table, I've got my assistant from Oklahoma City, then James Lee Whitt and Leon Panetta have got their assistants, and I've got my back to the door, and all of a sudden the people on this side, they're kind of starting to get up, and I thought, well, maybe the meeting's over. I don't know what's going on. And I turn around, the president walks in, and he's walking in, and of course, then everybody jumps up. And he says, Mayor, I heard you was in the building. I just wanted to stop and say hello and see how you were doing. And I said, well, Mr. President, I'm doing very well. He says, is the staff taking care of you? They're all going to go, yeah. And I said, yes, they are. They're just been excellent. We're doing very good. I'm going before a House committee the next week or sometime I went through. And this would have been, probably a month or two after the bombing. And so he's thinking about the reelection campaign. And he said, Mayor, I've got to see if you can help me with something. I said, sure, whatever you got, Mr. President. He says, I'm running for office next time. Yes, sir. Is you think you could help me carry Oklahoma? And I said, Mr. President, I can do a lot of things, but I can't help you on that. I'm sorry. And he just laughed. He laughed.
And we were a little more normal then, even.
Oh, he was. He just laughed and shook, and he said, well, I'm glad to see you, and I'll see you next time in here.
Thanks, but no thanks. Mayor Holt, we approached the 30th anniversary. President Clinton's coming back for the 8th time, I think. We just talked about this. There's no political gain, no reason he ever had to come back, but he continues to come back and remember. And you said one time, we choose not to forget. Talk about that.
Well, sure. So, first of all, I gave a longer version of, I think, our gratitude to President Clinton for his commitment to Oklahoma City at the 20th anniversary of this center in December, which is on YouTube, and you should watch it. And so that's more eloquent and more comprehensive for all the things that President Clinton has meant to Oklahoma City. But he has, as you just said, come basically on every 5-year anniversary. The 25th was during the pandemic, and so everybody just made videos. But he has physically come to Oklahoma City every 5 years otherwise. And I think we had the video earlier where he spoke the words that, of course, he wrote, that where he said, "For as many tomorrows as it takes." Right. And boy, we're 30 years worth now, and he's still there. So yeah, we're very grateful for his the way he has kept his word. And yeah, it's really important that everybody pull together to remember the lessons of 1995. Certainly, next Saturday, we will honor those who were killed, survived, and changed forever. And that is a very important part of the day. We will again show our gratitude to those who came to our rescue. And that's a very important part of the day. But I think the continued relevance of the memorial extends far beyond, and should extend far beyond, the days when it is all but become a historical event and nobody has any personal connection to it, because it is a scar in our downtown that is a reminder of the natural outcome of dehumanization and political extremism and acceptance of political violence, really violence of any kind. And so I think that's ultimately the lesson that President Clinton helps us to carry forward by his presence. It's certainly the lesson that we carry forward at the memorial and the museum, which is spectacular. This is a very good museum. So too is the one just a few hours drive to the west, which we certainly invite you to anytime. Because it really is world class in so many ways. It's moving, it's informational, but it also very intentionally is not just about history. It is about reminding you the importance of these lessons. And gosh, in 2025, it does seem pretty relevant to the current political discourse in our country, that we need to remember that we have so much more in common than we don't, and that we have a system in place to resolve our differences that does not require violence.
Well, I started the night by saying we were surrounded by great leadership. I think you can see we were blessed with some great leaders at the time, and President Clinton certainly was one of them. So let's wrap up tonight hearing from President Clinton.
I so wish I could be with all of you gathered at the Presidential Center this evening to mark the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, a devastating act of terror that broke our hearts, yet brought out the best in America. On April 19th, 1995, an unthinkable tragedy unfolded in our heartland, and the eyes of the world turned to Oklahoma City. The domestic terrorists wanted to attack Middle America. They wanted to shake the city and our country to the core. They wanted us to join them in hating our government and killing our citizens. When Hillary and I attended the memorial prayer service a few days later, the rescue teams were still working day and night. There was still smoke coming from the ruins. We grieved together and prayed together as one American family for those who lost their lives and their loved ones, the many who were wounded, and everyone whose life changed forever that fateful day. I tried to speak for all of us in saying to the people of Oklahoma City, you have lost too much, but you have not lost everything. And you have certainly not lost America. For we will stand with you for as many tomorrows as it takes. The American people kept that promise to Oklahoma City. But what we couldn't have known then was just how much more the people of Oklahoma City, under the leadership of Governor Keating and Mayor Rhetoric and their successors, would give back to America in return. I want to thank them, my friend Mayor David Holt, and Kerry Watkins, who's always been there, for all they have done to build a future worthy of the lives that were lost, to redeem that sacrifice through what has come to be known as the Oklahoma Standard: service, honor, and kindness. I also want to thank James Lee Witt and Don Bear, who were there tonight, and the many others from my administration who helped the city to recover and brought justice to those who committed the horrible act. After 3 decades, the lessons of Oklahoma City are as important as ever. I hope tonight's program reminds us all that just how far the city has come, and that what unites us as Americans is still far more important than what divides us. Thank you all for making this event possible, and my best wishes for a great commemoration.
Well, I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. What an inspiring evening. I want to thank our friends from Oklahoma who made the journey here to be with us tonight, all of you. Mike Turpin. You know, Mike just told me a funny little thing that I'm going to share. Mayor Holt, you probably already know this, but you're Bill Clinton's favorite Republican. You know, currently, right now, yes. Right. But you now wear that. But on a serious note, may we all never forget the lessons, as President Clinton just said, from Oklahoma City are probably more important now than they ever have been before. So I hope you all enjoyed this powerful evening. Thank you all again. Safe travels. I know many of you have to go back to Oklahoma tonight, and we hope to see you at our next program. Thank you.
It's not even 8 o'clock yet.